morning, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me at the back? I bring you warm greetings from Fairfax County, where there are horse lovers and the horse lobby is strong. I have interacted with the horse community for over 20 years as I do my daily task to work with individuals as well as horse groups and conduct seminars and presentations of this nature. So I enjoy working with horse people. I feel like I should own a couple in my backyard as well, but I don't have any. You know, because of my long period with the horse community, as I came to this meeting, I ran into quite a few old friends. Anita Ramos, Reed Folsom, even Anna I used to know in Fairfax. And I have also met a few new people like Nancy, and also there's a friend of mine who I saw last night. He is the owner of EIO Farm, and his name is McDonald. Got the joke? My wife tells me that, you know, you always think you're friends with people. They don't even know who you are. When I quite feel like I'm friends with somebody else because I just spent 2 minutes with them. But you know, I think Professor Daniels did a good job in telling us about the economic influence that equine activity has in Fairfax County, and also talked about the zoning ordinance that works or allows us to actually have what we want to have on our properties. My job here today is to take it to another step and actually try to tell you about what you can do in terms of equine activities to preserve your watershed and also to preserve your property. Because what we want to do is to make sure we have an environmentally friendly, environmentally safe activity, and also not to deteriorate the value of our property. We want to maintain our real estate property, so there are things that we can do. All is not lost. There's a lot of things we can do. A lot of them you would know already, but I'll just reinforce those things. You know, I think before we start, it's better for us to be on the same platform. I want to talk to you about watershed number 1, because that's part of what we're trying to protect. The reason I think I should throw this slide in is because just 2 weeks ago, I went to someone's property, and the gentleman was saying to me, you know, I have this operation going on, and the watershed that runs in my back there is kind of polluted. So the way he used the term watershed suggests to me that he doesn't have a full concept of what a watershed is. And that's why I thought I should throw the slide in and try to get us all on the same level before I move on. This illustration here is just a 3-dimensional attempt in really giving a good picture of what a watershed is. If you can see, it shows a land relief, high hills, low valleys with streams. Stream come together, join to form first order stream, join to form a second order stream, and it comes down to the big water body that we have down here. Diverse types of land use, industrial, commercial, and maybe agricultural. So let's say this is our horse operation that we have. And whatever we do eventually affects the whole watershed itself. Because things run from our backyards as they run from this commercial site, as they run from this industrial site into the common water body and comes down here. It goes through our soils, and we have soil infiltration of groundwater. So what is a watershed? It is all the land area that if it rains, like we see a rainstorm developing there, would flow through over the land into the nearest creek or pond or lake, and flows all the way down into the lowest portion of this land relief. So the divide we see here marks the watershed of wherever we live in. So let's say the gentleman I was talking to 2 weeks ago lives in this house. His watershed, he thinks, is this stream. No, his watershed is this whole area that drains into a common water body. With that in mind, I think we should move on, and so we can understand what we're talking about now as we move on. Our beautiful buddies, they're good to have. Very friendly, devoted friends, would take us for a ride every once in a while, expensive, and we really can't part away from them. But as we begin to think about what it takes to maintain these animals, we should also begin to think of the impact that they have on our watershed and on our property and on ourselves. It may surprise you to know that the Richmond field office for the National Agricultural Statistics Services recently said there are 215,000 horses in Virginia. That contrasts to a release of 2007 from the USDA Agricultural Research Services that said there are 95,000 horses in Virginia. Now, regardless of the discrepancy in the numbers, even if we look at 95,000 horses, that's a lot of horses. And when you consider that these animals, on the average, they can be 1,000 pounds on 4 small legs. They can eat a lot of grass and give out a lot of waste. We know that there is potential for us to adversely impact our environment. But we're going to stay on the positive side today. I'm going to talk to you about what can be done, how we can do it, and what results we should expect to get an overall improvement in our watershed, on our property, and be the envy of our neighbor in a horse community. What I have here for you is what I should probably describe as the utopia of a horse operation. It is so perfect that even the property is a perfect rectangle. The house sits up front, nice road with no vehicles driving by. But at the back, I want to highlight some of the good things that this illustration has, so at least we can begin to visualize what we should expect when I go further into my presentation. If we have a stream, a nice flowing stream that goes through part of our property, between that stream and the area of horse equine activity, we should have a dense vegetated buffer, which if it's not there, we can enhance by planting more trees, more shrubs, more ground cover. The purpose is so we can, through the process of filtration and infiltration into the soil, we may be able to extract some of the potential pollution that comes from our activity before it gets into what we call state water, which is the creek. The property should have multiple pasture areas, preferably of various sizes. Each of these pasture areas should have free access to the barn or what I call the sacrifice area. If it doesn't have direct access to it, as in field number 3, it's good to have a shed, a running shed, which is strategically positioned because you want to put the back of it towards the north. So come winter time, we'll have those cold northern winds blowing down, the horses can hide in the shed here. And a nice summer day, you can have the sun that comes around this way to warm up the interior of your shed. Other items worth mentioning are your heavy use area. Illustrated here is WSGHUA, which is your warm season grass heavy use area. CSGHUA, cool season grass heavy use area. And your SA, which is your sacrifice area. I stress this a lot where I come from because real estate in Fairfax County is very high, as it is in most areas in Virginia, by the way. So to have a successful horse operation, a decent one, you got to have what I call the sacrifice area or the heavy use area, because that's where that's what would create relief for you at times when we have a drought and the grass go into the dormant phase. At times when we have excessive snow or lots of rain and your pasture is all muddy and wet, you want to keep the horses out of it. And also at times when you just need to give the grass a break, time for it to grow. In addition to that, notice how we have our watering troughs, because now if you fenced off this animal from the creek, the animals from the creek, you need to bring water to them. They need water. My watering troughs are strategically positioned just so they can have access to each one for multiple fields. And of key importance, as was mentioned by Professor Daniels, your manure, you got to take care of your manure. Carting your manure from the barn to the edge of the creek is not what we're looking for. We're looking, yes, we're looking for having a manure at least 100 feet from the edge of the creek, or at a proximity where your daily activity becomes chore efficient, where you don't have to break your back just to do the right thing. So having your manure in a strategic position like this, you can come from your barn to the manure site, you can compost your manure, and then you can rightly just distribute them in the fields that are involved. When we have horses of this nature, we also have to keep them away from the environment, the sensitive areas. We're looking at this picture, this is actually a creek that flows in this direction, but notice how they are fenced off. You have a good buffer, a grass buffer. Now, if I should improve this picture, I'll put a few shrubs and probably trees to create more diversity in the buffer vegetation itself. But notice how the pasture is green. No doubt, these people have a rotational grazing system. Horses would eat forever if you allowed them. You know, they evolved with grassland. That's where they grew up. They like to have open space where they can run around and horse around and just graze and graze and graze. And if you let them, they'll graze 75% of the daytime. At night, they say they'll graze for 50% of the time. So they will continuously have the mouth to the ground. And a well-managed pasture provides high-quality feed for your horses. There's nothing like having good grass, good pasture for your horses to graze on, because it saves you money. It gives them all the needed nutrients to make them the healthy animals that they should be. And then even your neighbors get to love horses if they don't have any animal at all. Who wouldn't love to have this kind of pasture? This is a good pasture where it has rolling land, they're fenced off. There are trees to provide shade for the animals. There are multiple fields that you can move them through. By the way, this is in Fairfax. We do some things good sometimes. Now, having shown you this, there's also this, which is also in Fairfax. It's an indication of overgrazed pasture. You can see there are no cross fences. There are no trees to provide shade for the animals. There are weeds competing, there are rocks in the ground, all kinds of things that doesn't help for a good environmentally sound operation. This has been overgrazed. Again, this is in Fairfax, so I'll show you, I'll admit to it when we have some that are not up to snuff. In addition to this, we also know that when we have this kind of condition, this is a source of pollution. We're not taking care of our watershed. We're not taking care of our property. The neighbor of this operation would not like to be in this kind of neighborhood. But the previous one, they love it because the property value goes up. They like to drive through every day, just look at the horses, bring the kids by, look at them. So there's diversity that we as equestrian people have to actually be aware of and stand up as our own responsibility. Now that's what I think is a good pasture. It has all the mixes. Pastures have 3 types of vegetation, by the way. It has the grasses, it has legume, and then it has what we call forbs. Forbs are just flowering herbicides, herbs, herbaceous plants, I should say, that are not graminoid. They're not grasses, sedges, or rushes. Now, as equestrian people, I know you're frowning, no, I don't like that for my pasture. Why? Because it has quite a bit of clover. And I know a good pasture for horses, you want to have less than 25% of clover so your horse doesn't get into the drooling phase. But it does have the grasses, it does have some clover, it does have some forbs, which is good. And here's an illustration of, this is typically an illustration, so it's not what you should see in your pasture. But the purpose of this really is to show you how, if you have healthy grass growing in good soil with good organic material in it, very dark and provides all necessary nutrients, has a high water holding capacity, you would have deep-rooted grass system. And I will come back to this, I'll make reference to this in the future, but I want to point out before I get there that if you notice the mass, if this grass is about 5 or 6 inches tall, the maximum amount of roots you would find within from that point to probably about that point. The rest are all the mature roots that are going down into the soil to actually extract moisture and extract nutrients. Your phosphorus is down here, well, so within the first 18 inches of your soil. But on a drought period, if your pasture has to look good, then you would need this kind of good grass that will actually reach down to get the moisture and supply the grass, because I don't expect we'll be putting sprinkler in a pasture. Now, let's talk about what steps we need to take to get that kind of pasture we just looked at. Good pasture, good deep root system, good dense grass, and good leguminous plants to it. For us to maintain that, we've got to be able to bring it to have the appropriate amount of nutrients, appropriate amount of pH that would help the soil, the grass take up the nutrient level. And to do that, we need to do some fertilizing. A lot of people tell me, oh, you need to feed the pasture. Well, I'm here to tell you this. When we add fertilizer, we're not giving food to the grass. Plants make their own food through a process known as photosynthesis. What we're doing is giving them nutrients to help them grow stronger. Because, you know, every day I wake up, I take my, what they call one a day or Centrum Adult, whatever it is called. After taking that, I still take breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Because that's what food is. So plants make their own food. So let's not hook on, oh, I've got to give these people some food. No, you want to give them nutrients so they can develop strong cells. Well, the question begs, for us to know how much we need to put in the soil, we need to do a soil test. And we'll come to this point and say, how do we collect the soil samples that we send into the lab to get the soil tested? I would say soil samples from pasture are best if collected from depth of 12 inches below the surface. Is that true, or is that false? I think it's false. I think it's false. Why is it false? I think the best area for your sampling is from 2 to 4 inches below ground surface. Because if you think back at that inset I showed you, the most density of grassroots is within that 4 to 6 inches depth. And that's what you want to have a representation of, to know exactly how much nutrients and how much pH or liming you need for your soil, so the grass can readily get to it, so it won't go down to below the root zone and get lost in groundwater. So collect a representative sample, and the recommended fertilizer application is done once a year. Once a year. Our lime is applied once every 3 years. The lime recommendation is usually very large. It's in tons per acre, so that's pretty large. Your fertilizer is in pounds per acre. So let's think about that. The large amount, do once every 3 years, and the recommended fertilizer is done once a year. For best result, apply your fertilizer in the fall. To be honest, you can apply fertilizer anytime you want, but it is best to do it in the fall. That way you're maximizing the returns from your investment. And that is, what that says is, if you apply in the fall, the grass, the vegetative growth is going into dormancy. So you're providing nutrients for the root system to become very developed, mature, deep, while the upper portion stays dormant. By the time we turn around to spring, that mature root is ready to feed the grass so much nutrients that you would have a good stand of grass coming up for you. And with your samples, any time is a good time to collect your soil sample. So don't put off, well, I'll do it in the fall. No, do it now. Get your soil sample and know what it is. And because of climatic conditions and biological activities in the soils, it is best to do your soil samples about the same time whenever you do it. So if you do it in the spring, try to do it every spring so you have a uniform standard time. If you do it in the fall, try to do it in the fall and all the time. Our friends, they're good grazers. The next point we're going to look at is controlled grazing. These guys would enjoy eating the sweetest part of the grass, so they would reach for it constantly. They just have a teeth that can get down there and eat and eat and eat and eat, to the point where they would devour a certain area. It's all gone. If you don't move them away, they're all gone. They also have a habit wherein they don't like to eat where they've left their droppings. They like to move away from it. And so by the time you know it, they develop what they're known for as being island grazers, I-S-L-A-N-D, island grazers, because once they eat, all this is gone, and if they have this stuff lying around here, they don't eat that, you have a big mushroom of weeds and vegetation growing. So by the time you know it, you have spots here and there, so they call them island grazers. We want to be able to control how they graze. We can help them graze better. So we want to do a controlled grazing, which involves actually dividing your fields into smaller portions so that you can get them to be confined with one area and they graze, then you move them to the next, to the next, to the next. This is Fairfax again. We have a few good sites in Fairfax. This person has, it's not a huge acreage actually, but he's divided them into 3 or 4 parts. There's one field, another one, another one, another one, and I think one on the back. All of these fields lead to, beyond this fence is what we call their sacrifice area. So it makes for a efficient operation for the landowner. They close all the gates and let them out to this field. The gates remains open so they can come in and go into the shed if the weather condition is bad. They have water in the sacrifice area somewhere. Now, how long should we graze our fields before we move them around, or move the horses out of there? Well, that depends on certain factors, and let me show you this chart here, and you can see what it is. Based on maintaining 70% of grass growth, if you have 1 horse and you have 0.5 acre, we do have in Fairfax. The theory says it should be less than 3 hours, because you don't want them to overgraze. You want to move them around as best you can. But if you have bigger property like an acre or 1.5 acre, you can go up to longer periods. Then if you have greater than 2 acres, it's unlimited. That's when you do what they call continuous grazing, because your horses move around, they just graze. But mind you, have to do all the types of pasture techniques, which I'll get to, but you don't have to do the rotational grazing. You just let them loose and they can graze and get a year-round supply of food. The next point I want to talk about is clipping your pasture. Yeah, if you look at that top picture, you would see, I think that looks like sheep, but that's okay. We get the idea. I didn't have anyone for horses. But you know, whatever you have to clip your grass, if you have small pasture like some people have in Fairfax, you probably can do this and get away with it. But the purpose of clipping is just so when you have that mound of stuff lying around and low air, you want to have it evenly clipped, evenly mowed after you move your horses. So that whole field would begin to grow afresh. You would have new energy, new growth. So when you bring them back, you would have a uniform spread of grass that the horses would love to graze on. Overseeding is another practice. You want to introduce high energy, younger seeds, newer seeds into your pastures to replace or to help the older grass that's been reproducing itself. So you always want to overseed your pasture. And to do that, you got to make sure you have a good seed-soil contact. And what helps you to do that is if you do a little bit of harrowing before you do your seeding. It doesn't have to be so high-tech, if I may say. If you have those long fences in your backyard, just tie it to your equipment and drag it around. That would also work for you. But this is just a harrow that one of my cooperators have, and I thought it was a good picture that I took. Next question is, what kind of seeds would you use for overseeding? There are various types of seed mixes. If you go to this southern states or whatever else, Virginia pasture, they all have mixes they can recommend to you. But there are 3 basic types of seeds. And this is not a good, it was meant for you to read this. I was going to highlight just this portion. And what I want to point out is some of the mixes that basic mixes that we have. We have orchard grass in Kentucky as a grass component. We have tall fescue as a grass component. We have just orchard grass, the grass component. Tall fescue, some horse people frown on it. But my theory tells, my teachings tell me that tall fescue is a very good grass because it gives all what the horses want. But if you have a male if you're doing breeding of horses, you may want to stay away from your tall fescue because of the endophyte problem that we all know about. But all the alternative grasses are there that you can consider. They all have the pros and the cons, and so it's up to you to be as site-specific as you want on your property. It is important to also note that when it comes to the pasture mixes, you may never see tall fescue mixed with other type of grasses. Because in addition to, well, not in addition, as a part of the nature of tall fescue, they give out a certain type of chemical which doesn't support other grasses. It makes them either just be unhealthy or they just die out. And that is called the allelopathic allelopathic tendency of fescue. They discourage other grass from growing, they just dominate the scene. So that's why in good pastures, highly recommended pastures, you will not see fescue being mixed with other grasses. Yes?
Using rye over fescue?
Rye is also a good grass. If you use the annual rye is one, if you use the perennial rye is another thing. But generally speaking, your fescue would have influence. Don't get me, maybe I overemphasize. It may not kill completely, but they won't thrive as much as they should. Rye is good because rye germinates very fast. So if you're doing overseeding or if you're doing renovation of your pasture, yes, you can use rye to get a first growth to be supported by the other soil types, other grass types. Dragging is another thing that we talked about, which I had suggested before. It helps to distribute the manure over the field. So you have this mound and you break it up and you have it distributed over, and that would break down and add to the soil, to the pasture itself. I have a few people in my area where I come from. They have, I think they call it pasture vacuum. Go around the vacuum and vacuum them. I try to encourage them, don't worry about it. This is fine. It's part of the soil. Just recycle the nutrients. It's your dollars that you're seeing a different form, so just recycle it. So dragging is good. I recommend dragging. When you do that, it also breaks up the eggs of other things that may be in the manure that may become weeds or become pests of some sort. When you expose them to the atmosphere, then they don't thrive to develop to the next stage that causes concerns. Again, when you break it up, it just absorbs water and allows water to come through. It doesn't just shed on the sides of it because you have that mound there. Another portion I like to talk about is renovating your pasture. Because the horses are animals of habits. They like to walk along the fence line back and forth, back, until you tell them, okay, go to bed, then they go to bed. But so that becomes a hardened path, and you may need to break it up to renovate your pasture. Renovation of pasture can even take redoing your whole pasture field because probably the pH is not right and you want to start afresh. Controlling weeds. Weeds is a big problem that we all know about. When we talk about weeds, I like to introduce a term which is called, which I refer to as integrated pest management. Weeds come in different forms, and what integrated pest management is all about is that you're taking an ecological approach, incorporating chemical, cultural, and biological approaches to keep your pest within a tolerant level. So if you look at different types of weeds here, you have your perennial weeds, your winter annual, your summer annual. There are things that can be done before you get to the chemical application stage. For instance, if you mow your lawn, if you clip like your pasture, you won't have your weed getting to the flower stage. Once it gets to this stage, then you know you're generating new weeds for the next season. All of these are in the flower stages. So you want to keep them under control by mowing, by the way, with integrated pest management, you have to set what they call the threshold. If it goes above that threshold, you're at liberty to use herbicides. Herbicide is not a bad thing, as long as you use it the right way, at the appropriate time, and you have recommendation from a professional like myself who can look, first of all, identify the type of weed, understand the cycle it's going through, and tell you what will be the prime time for you to apply your herbicide. Now I call this number one, the final one I call the resource protection area preservation. That's a term I have in my area where I come from. I know we have diverse group here today, but what this really refers to is that environmentally sensitive site that may be in your backyard. Like when I showed you the Utopia of horse operation, I showed you area you have to keep vegetated because it was next to the stream. That's what we in my area call the resource protection area. That's not my heartbeat, I just touched the resource. So what we're looking for is to keep that area environmentally sound. Don't allow your horses to go in there. Keep a good buffer so it would filter out some of the nutrients that run off your property. So these are the 4 steps that would give you a good pasture like you have in the background there. But let's talk about manure. Yes, manure management is also a big thing. Neck to neck with pasture is manure management. And that's a challenge to most of my people that I work with in Fairfax County, because they have smaller properties, they have big animals. The horses not only graze, but they import hay and grains for them. So they produce quite a bit. And if you allow this to get out of hand, then you're in big trouble. One full-grown horse will produce about 45 pounds of waste. That is the organic material and the urine waste that comes out because they drink so much water as well. When you convert that, if you have a 5-horse operation for a year with 50% confinement, that is, I'm banking on the fact that you keep them in the barn half at night. And so obviously you clean the barn, you clean the stalls. That kind of condition, you talk about 20 tons of waste per year. That's a tremendous amount. Then you begin to wonder, what do I do with this stuff? Well, again, the waste would come from your stalls and areas that you want to keep clean, not necessarily from your pasture, because I don't recommend removing it from the pasture, just spread it out. There are bad ways to manage your operation. This is one bad way, and the reason this is bad is because this is also in fast, but this is a contrast, and I'll show you how this person was transformed from this kind of operation to another type of operation. Right there, we see the grass is green, is a creek that flows, a very small creek that flows through. And again, from Fairfax, we call this area where this water flows the resource protection area. Well, to have your manure sitting right here, you have the leachate, which we all know as black tea, draining into the waterway and going off in someplace else. It's not a good practice for your watershed. So I worked with this person, and he was very open-minded and decided, you know, I like what you're telling me. So how do we better manage our waste? First thing we want to do is to know what it contains, and that's what someone like me do. I go out to your place, I collect manure samples, send it off to the lab, and have it analyzed, so I know what it contains. Because I'm going to ask you to spread it on your pasture, so I would do your soil sample as well, and combine those 2 information to come up with what I would call your nutrient management plan. It's a 3-year-long plan that tells you how much nutrients, how much lime you should apply to your soil to maximize the yield. Another option would be for you to ship the waste to an environmentally sensitive location. Maybe you get a farmer friend who would use it. Another would be for you to spread regularly. Get this from the pile you have and spread. Now, spreading your manure is one. It's like when you drag your fields. When you store and pile waste before spreading is another one, where you're partially composting it before you spread it. That's better. It's better than not partially composting it at all. But the best is to compost. When you compost your waste, you do a tremendous amount of good for yourself, for your watershed, and for the value of your property. Because you reduce the value of the volume of your waste by 40 to 60%. You kill all the bacteria and pathogens and weed seeds and worms that we're concerned about. That's why some people want to spread waste on their pastures. And not only that, you make it into usable soil material that you can put back on your pasture. This just attempts to define compost for you, which I will read to you. But basically it says it's a breakdown, an aerobic breakdown of the organic material by bacteria to form simple or carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen mixture. This is an attempt of showing you what the manure analysis results look like. When I did this, and because of a high privacy we have in Fairfax, I had to block out the name, so you won't know whose manure that is. But basically when I get this, if I look at it, just looking at this portion, I can tell how that person managed their manure. Because this is the ammonium nitrogen component of the manure. This is your total nitrogen component. The total nitrogen is called the kilojoule nitrogen. It consists of the ammonium nitrogen component and the organic nitrogen component. These two together form your total nitrogen. So in the lab results, you have an analysis of the ammonium nitrogen, which is that, and the total nitrogen. So for me to know how much you have in organic nitrogen, I would subtract that bit from that bit, and I can tell how much would go back to your soil in terms of composting. Other interesting thing to look at here is your phosphorus and your potassium. That is also analyzed here, and I factor those into your results to make sure we don't get we get as much out of it as possible. Managing your manure yourself. It can be simply done as piling it in a place where the soil is probably clay base and doesn't infiltrate into the soil to allow nitrogen and potassium to infiltrate the groundwater and pollute the groundwater. There are things you can do. If you have a kind of property that's not flat, that probably is a slanted, isolated, slanted relief like this, you may want to just shave this portion slightly flat and then build a little berm, dirt berm on the uphill side. So when you have runoff coming down the slope like this, it is forced to go around and not through your pile, because you don't want it to leach your nitrogen, your phosphorus. That's the value in your pile. You want that to stay in there. So you want to divert the runoff away from it. And then just cover it with a tarp. Tarp does a lot of good things for you. It keeps to maintain the heat that you need. Composting gets about 150 degrees high, and you want to keep that temperature up for about 2 or 3 days running, because that's what will kill your weed seeds, kill your bacteria, kills your pathogen, kills your earth, your worms, all the bad stuff. Another form of composting is what I call a multicell composting in Fairfax again, by the way. This is a multicell composting on a concrete base, impervious base, and then you have 1, 2, 3, 4 cells. Notice how the wood has slots in it, so you can have oxygen getting air going in there. And then it's covered. The brown tarp you see here is not for nothing. It's because we believe that we should cover our compost to make sure we keep flies out of it. We keep the heat up. We keep the smell if there's any smell in place. Of significance is the ramp at the back. This is a high-tech composting facility. Ramp at the back where the lady cuts her manure from the back and then dump it in. Dump it, dump, dump. So that's one way you can design this yourself very locally. Here's another person that has a huge running operation, and this is the indoor riding ring, by the way, so just imagine the enormity of the operation. She has in the back a fenced off area where she brings all her manure in, and every once in a while she would come in with a front end loader and just turns it, and she locks the gate, and the gate has visual hindrance so you don't know it's in there. But this is another way she stores her manure and then spreads in the field when it's time for her to do that. This is the Cadillac of a composting facility. It comes with with zinc roof. It comes with engineered structure to hold the roof in place. This can withstand 90-mile-per-hour windstorm. It has concrete apron, so you can drive your front end loader and dump your waste into any one of those cells. And these barriers you see here you can remove and then fill that cell up, put them back in, and then continue to this, and that. So while that is cooking, you'll be filling these ones up. This is one that you can it's pretty expensive to put in place, but with the agricultural cost share program that we involve in, you can get funding to have it constructed. Then you would have you would have tax benefit from what's out of your pocket. Now, to determine your size of a facility, this is one of the things you need to be aware of. How do you clean your barn, your stalls? The number and size of your animals. Are they younger animals, are they older animals? The average daily confinement, because if you keep them in the barn, I don't know, 12 hours a day compared to 8 hours a day, then you would have more manure to handle. Your spreading cycle, how long do you want to keep before you spread? Is it 4 months? Is it 6 months? Is it 2 months, as the case may be? Well, we talked about this in passing, that when you compost, you help the environment because you reduce the volume, becomes more manageable. improves the biological activity of your soil, improves its water holding capacity, it gives you the root system an ability to even infiltrate deeper into your soil, so they have more access to reach down from water moisture and probably phosphorus and potassium that may be down there. And then it's your dollars that you're recycling back on your property. So there are benefits of this. Now, when you spread your manure, your composted manure, make sure it's not done on the snow, on a snowy pasture, or on frozen ground. It should be just at the time when the grass begins to grow, when they need the resources, they need the energy. That's when you put your manure down, and that's what this guy is doing. This, again, is in Fairfax, and he's got his trees there to provide horses. It's a beautiful, it's a model site, by the way, in Fairfax. Now that operation that I showed the manure on the ground, that's it. That's it right here. I'm proud of it. I work with them, and they've won an award from us, and they're doing a good job. Now, happiness indeed is having acres of pasture, good-looking pasture. So I think we can all work together to protect our environment, protect our land, and make our operation the envy of our horse community. I was hoping there would be no questions, but I see one hand up. Yes.
Where did you say, I'm assuming you write for a grant to get assistance as far as the Cadillac?
Yeah. Yes, you're addressing that, aren't you? Well, let me be more direct about that. If you work with my sister agency in your area, the Soil and Water Conservation District in your area, they have access to Department of Conservation and Recreation, and they have these funds available for agricultural pest management practices. And if you qualify for it, you have to meet certain criteria. You have to be an agricultural operation, boom, 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 and boom. If you meet those, then they can design the facility for you, i.e. the best management practice for you. It has to meet certain criteria. Like I said, that facility meets a 90 mile per hour wind. It has to be there for 10 years, guaranteed to be there for 10 years. You would have to guarantee to keep it for 10 years. And then they'll provide the funding for you. They do all the engineering work from NRCS. They approve the location where it would be, and then do all the necessary details. And then your obligation, then they'll give you 75% of the cost. 75% of the cost. Then you have to come up with the other 25% out of pocket. Of that 25% that comes out of your pocket, 25% of that can be tax deductible. So, I think it's a win-win situation.
Is that the same funding that we also get assistance for fencing, like out of creeks?
Exactly. It could be. There are different pots of money. There's, the Equine money, there's the cost share money, there's different. But basically what you're concerned about is getting some financial assistance. Yes, your stream protection is part of it. Your manure management thing is part of it. Your cross fencing and bringing water to the field, like I showed you in the initial slide, can also be done as part of the cost share program.
Any other questions?
How do you feel about farmers who are increasingly using weed killer on their hay fields? Because for years I had marvelous compost. Friends would come and take it and use it. We were all happy. And then our gardens, things grow and then poof, they wither up and die. They don't produce. And it came down to the fact that my hay farmer has started using weed killer. Now, it's okay to put the compost on my yard and on my pastures, but I can't use it on gardens or flowers anymore. So, you got any solution to this?
Well, to answer your first question, how do I feel about it? When you purchase, first of all, when you get recommendation to use what specific herbicide you want to use, let's say the hay farmer has genuine problems. The weed is above his level of tolerance. Let's say he's following pest management practices, integrated pest management practice. the label of that, of whatever of herbicide you're using, specifies what period of time you should leave that hayfield or the pasture dormant or unused before you begin to use it. If you don't follow those regulations, so you cut your hay soon after you put it down, then you're going to have problems like you're having. So it's a case of whoever that applicator is or the farmer is not following the instructions, and that's against state regulation. You must follow the labels on your herbicide if you have to use it right.
Well, he did tell me the first cutting would not have weed killer. It's the other cuttings that are going to have more weed killer on it.
Yeah, most of the recommended recommended herbicide are ones that degenerate over time. Those really hard stuff that stays there forever, not that common anymore. I don't think it's legal to use them. But most of today's stuff are deteriorate over time, and so the amount that probably would be residual amount in the hay is not enough to cause major killing of. So I just feel if it's not used properly, even though you may say, yeah, I didn't use the first batch, that may not be right, 100% right. Yes.
A little while ago, I did some research on organic herbicides. It didn't take long because there's not a whole lot out there. But has there been any new research that you've heard of that's going in that direction?
Research. You know, when I hear research, I think different, because research is, you know, they're working on it. But, you know, with the awareness of our environment and need to protect it, organic techniques are really beginning to get to the market. And for practices that you can use a proper 10-acre farm or something, that would really be pushing it. But if you have smaller operations, there are things I'm sure you know about, like your corn gluten that you can add to suppress broadleaf emergent weeds, and things of that nature is one that I would probably consider if it's practical.
Do you find with the farmers that you work with in Northern Virginia that they determine that it's actually more cost effective once they implement the best management practices than it was before?
Yes, and I say yes because we get more people coming to us, and they must see the benefit. Now, maybe I should be clear about that. In most of the areas that I work, the area that I cover, and the people I work with, their use of my service is not because they need financial assistance. Horses in Fairfax is a sign of affluence in most cases. So they like to do the right thing because they're smart people who like to do the right thing. So the financial aspect, I don't know if they're leaning towards, but they come and they like it. And those that have actually implemented, for instance, this operation, the composting thing I showed you, the neighbors loved it. They recommend people to take their horse and go, oh, that's a good guy. By the way, I failed to tell you that the first bad composting thing I showed you that had the leachate, that's the farm that now has a Cadillac composting facility. So what a transition. And when you give them financial incentive, they're willing to take it and run with it. Yeah, so it helps them. They come. I think it was in more rural area where I have true farmers who are looking to put bread on the table based on the ground. No question that would be the response. It helps my operation financially.